Ekaboyeyomi, it's good to have you join me on this podcast, Busui Oris Speaks. Today I'd like to delve into a question that has lingered for over half a century. For more than 50 years, people have asked this question: did Awolowo betray the Igbos? And by extension, did the Yoruba people betray the Igbos? Now, this is something that I've heard said by people, especially from the southeastern part of Nigeria, over and over again over the years. I've heard people say things like, not even question it, just make statements like, Awolowo betrayed Igbos, Yoruba betrayed Igbos, you guys are traitors and things like that. And it's something that a lot of people believe. And when we say a lot of people, I mean a whole lot of people. And that is whether they're educated or uneducated. You see the average Joe believing the same thing as the most educated people from the southeast saying things like that. And this thing has gone on for a long time. And the claim that has been made, for the most part, there's been no counter claims, right? Especially in the public space. You see, the thing about the Nigerian Civil War, or the history generally, especially as it has to do with the southeastern part of Nigeria, is that we have a single narrative, right? And there's something that Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie said in a TED talk. She called it the danger of a single story. And this is something that has been in the public space. A lot of people have believed it. People don't even question it anymore, because to question it is as though you're trying to, question the people's claim to what they went through, their pain, their suffering. So when they make statements like that, people just assume that perhaps they're right and they have a right to say it, because guess what? They went through something. But that's a very dangerous way to look at history. We shouldn't just allow things to fly because we're trying not to, bother people or make them feel somehow. Now, you can't put out lies against me and then I'm supposed to let it slide, because guess what? If I say something, you might feel uncomfortable. Well, you're making me feel uncomfortable as well. So the thing is this: I don't mind if I feel uncomfortable as long as what you're saying is the truth, because truth does not care about feelings. However, you can't make me feel uncomfortable based on what makes you happy, even if that thing is actually a lie. And I shouldn't have to make you feel comfortable based on lies either. We should be able to actually ask the question: is there any truth to the fact that Awolowo and the Yoruba people betrayed the Igbos? Now, this would probably not be a major thing, considering the fact that, it's something that people say. But understanding what's happening right now in the Nigerian political landscape makes it very, very important for us to begin to, provide clarity about about historical matters, so that we're not left, just believing because certain people say it. Another thing about Nigeria's history is that there's a vacuum. There's a vacuum. And, we all know this: nature abhors a vacuum. If there's a vacuum as far as history is concerned, it will be filled. And it will be filled by anything, whether it's the truth or not. People will believe it because that's the only thing they have, and there's no alternative. And that's the reason for this conversation today. Now, you might wonder, why revisit this topic now? Well, it's because the wrong doesn't become right, or the lies become truth just because it is believed by the majority of the people and it has been repeated over and over and over again. The truth of the matter is that when it comes to the idea of Nigerian history, what you have in the public space is more propaganda than the truth. And when I say the truth, I'm not saying the truth according to me. I'm saying having read different accounts from different sides, or from all sides, as a matter of fact, whether it's from the eastern side, the western side, the foreign side, the eastern minority side, having even the northern side, having read all those accounts, you should be able to come to what the truth really is, so that you don't become a victim of propaganda. And I think that for the most part, many people in Nigeria are victims of propaganda. So let's try and set the record straight so that we know exactly what happened, what was said, and if there's any betrayal, we can all own up to it. But if there's no betrayal, it's also important to set the record straight. All right, so let's start with this. I think a question I'd like to ask before I even get into the question of today is that, why is it that people believe in this narrative of Awolowo and Yoruba people betraying the Igbos, regardless of their educational status. Why? Because I've heard people from across different social strata, regurgitate these things about betrayal. And one of the first persons who is quite popular with this claim is Chinua Achebe. Now, to be clear, Chinua Achebe was a fantastic and celebrated writer. His book, Things Fall Apart, has been translated into more than 50 languages across the world. So there's no gainsaying the fact that he was brilliant, he was famous, and he was really great. He was a really great writer. However, apart from being a writer, he was also involved with the Biafran government. Not only was he a roving ambassador for Biafra, he was also part of the Ministry of Information, which is essentially Biafra Directorate for Propaganda. And there were certain things that were pushed out during the war that you would have expected that before he left this earth, he would have set the record straight. Unfortunately, his last book, There Was a Country, actually has some very interesting things, where in many cases, he found the way to essentially repeat the propaganda narrative from the Civil War. And one of those things he said has to do with this old betrayal thing that a lot of people bandy about today. So let's read something from his book, There Was a Country. He says, "The Civil War cast a long dark shadow on Nigeria. A generation of our children has grown up on a steady diet of false history and lies about the war. One example is the belief among many that Chief Obafemi Awolowo was a savior and a hero. My aim here is not to denigrate Awolowo, who was a foremost nationalist and a political leader, but to say that we cannot sweep his role in the war under the carpet." He goes on to say, "It is my view that Awolowo was driven by an overriding ambition for power, and that he saw the dominant Igbos at the time as obstacles. He is said to have once declared that if the eastern region seceded, the west would also secede. But when secession came, the west did not follow through." Now, there's a lot in this passage I just read that needs to be unpacked, right? Starting with the very first couple of sentences, and then we'll get to the one where he talked about what Awo was purported to have said. So he says here that the Civil War cast a long dark shadow on Nigeria. A generation of our children has grown up on a steady diet of false history and lies about the war. Hold on. You see, when I read that, the question that comes to mind is, who is responsible for feeding the children a steady diet of false history and lies about the war? Or about anything for that matter, as far as Nigeria's history is concerned. I think for the most part, it's people from the southeast. I think for the most part, it's people like the revered Chinua Achebe, who, for instance, made it a stock in trade to continually feed people a steady diet of false history. And one of such meals is found here in this passage I just read. But let's take it, one by one, and let's start with when he says a steady diet of false history and lies about the war. The truth of the matter is this: for somebody who worked in the Directorate of Propaganda and who churned out propaganda that has been debunked over and over again, it makes it very easy to understand the fact that he's actually projecting here. When it comes to being fed or people feeding others the steady diet of false history and propaganda and lies, I think is more from the Biafran side. And you're going to get to understand why I say that in a minute. So it says here, it is my view that Awolowo, this is Achebe by the way, it is my view that Awolowo was driven by an overriding ambition for power and that he saw the dominant Igbos at the time as obstacles. How? This is ridiculous, and I'll tell you why. So when he says that the Igbos were dominant and they were the obstacles, my question is, in what way were the Igbos obstacles to Awolowo's overriding ambition? Were they stopping him from doing anything? Was this before he went to prison or after he went to prison? When the program started, for instance, Awolowo was already in prison. The ambition he had, how exactly was his participation in the war a way to prove that the Igbos were in his path? These are some of the things we're going to be, x-raying in the coming sessions and episodes. But for today, I just want to make it very clear. The Igbos were never a threat to the Yorubas. What they were was, especially in the First Republic, what happened really was that a group of people decided to use nepotism as the tool of getting ahead in federal civil service. And even that did not affect Awolowo, because Awolowo was not trying to work in the federal civil service. If he had any ambitions, which he did, it would be to become the president of Nigeria. And that had nothing to do with Igbo dominance. And one of these days, I think we're going to have to actually question this claim about Igbo dominance and how it actually happened. But that's for another day. Let's continue with the thing that Chinua Achebe wrote here. So he says here, we cannot sweep his role in the war under the carpet. I agree with him, and we shouldn't. And we're going to have episodes where we're going to discuss Awolowo's role in the Civil War. Perhaps the next episode will be on that, because a lot of things have been said by people like this who try to, find a way to make something out of nothing and make him the villain that he was never. But we're going to get into all of that much later. So let's get into the one that has to do with the idea of Awolowo and Yoruba people betraying the Igbos. So he says here, he's talking about Awolowo. He said to have once declared that if the eastern region seceded, the west would also secede. But when secession came, the west did not follow through. Now, when you read that, it would sound like Awolowo promised the East, or Ojukwu specifically, something about if you secede, the West would also secede. But guess what Achebe did in this passage? He said, this is actually quite tricky. Achebe wrote, he is said to have once declared. Achebe was not a child in 1967. Achebe did not make the claim that Awolowo said anything. He is said to have declared. Not he declared. Not he said. If he said or declared, Achebe would be in a very good position to know. So what he was doing was basically to just throw something out there and make it seem like he said something. He promised Ojukwu something. But the question is, did Awolowo promise Ojukwu or the eastern region that the West would secede if the eastern region decided to do so? That's the question. Was there any agreement between them? Was there any documentation? Transcripts perhaps? Recordings? Is there anything that we can hold on to be able to arrive at the same conclusion that Achebe arrived at? And by the way, it's not just Achebe who wrote something like this. Another person who wrote something similar, also happens to be someone who is very educated. She's a PhD holder. She was a federal minister in Nigeria under President Olusegun Obasanjo and President Goodluck Jonathan. She was a minister of finance. She was a director of the World Bank. And she's presently the head of the World Trade Organization. She is not your average Jane. She's educated, she's brilliant, she's an economist. And I'm talking about no other than Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. She wrote a book titled Achebe, Teacher of Light. And let me read to you what she says in that book. She says, the Civil War broke out on May 30, 1967, when the Igbos and the Southeast, under Colonel Emeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, declared Biafra an independent state, with Enugu chosen as its capital. Biafra also had its own national currency. The Igbos had made this secessionist move with the promise from Chief Obafemi Awolowo in the Southwest that the Yorubas would follow suit. The plan was, if the Southeast and Southwest broke away from the Nigerian Federal Union, the federal government would not be able to fight a war on two fronts. Awolowo, however, failed to honor his pledge, and the secession proved a nightmare for the Igbos. Awolowo, in fact, became the Minister of Finance of the federal government during the Civil War. The Igbos interpreted this as a sign of bad faith on the part of the Yoruba leader, and trust was further eroded between the two ethnic groups. The Yorubas using superior federal military power in alliance with the North and other Nigerian groups, and supported by the British, forced the Igbos back into the Federal Union after a period of 3 years. This is how propaganda works. Achebe said it was repeated on Radio Biafra. Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala picked it and wrote the same thing, and a lot of people believe. Now, why wouldn't you believe that? She's a doctor. Achebe is a celebrated writer. These are famous people. So they must know what they're saying, isn't it? But no, they don't know what they're saying as far as this is concerned. Now, this doesn't take away from the fact that these are brilliant people. These are celebrated people, and they should be celebrated for whatever they do as far as profession and career is concerned. But when it comes to history, this is not history. This is propaganda. That's what they're telling you here. And how does propaganda work? Pick up half-truths, spice it up with a heavy dose of your own agenda while simplifying complex issues, and then you make everything appear black or white, and at the same time you appeal to emotions and repeat your concoction over and over and over again until people believe it. It's not that it is true. It is just that it has been perfectly, put together to drive a particular narrative. And so for more than 50 years, people believe these things, including intellectuals, believing it to the point where they published it. But just because they said it does not mean it is true. Now, here's the interesting part. Although Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala is not from the Southeast, she's Igbo. And I would say that she has heard this thing over and over again, just like every other person, educated or uneducated, and she has come to believe it. The problem is she should have interrogated that claim. When and where did Chief Awolowo tell the Igbos that if you decide to secede, we're also going to do it together, so the federal government becomes, weak, since they will not be able to fight on two fronts? Where did this happen? Then it says here, Awolowo failed to honor his pledge. What pledge? How am I supposed to keep a promise I did not make? But a lot of people said, no, he made that promise. He made that promise, and he betrayed the trust, like she wrote here. I mean, anybody would read this, a young person would read this and just have the basis for hate. And by the way, in Nigeria, those who accuse people of hating on them are the ones who project hate. Let's make that very clear. You read this, you hear the rhetorics of the Civil War, and you have a basis for your hatred towards other groups. You think you are hated. You think you're the victim of everything. But in reality, this did not happen. How do I know this? I'm going to read something to you from a man called Chief MCK Ajuluchukwu. But before I do that, let me just reiterate something that Dr. Okonjo-Iweala said in her book. She said, the plan was if the Southeast and Southwest broke away from the Nigerian Federal Union, the federal government would not be able to fight a war on two fronts. Awolowo, however, failed to honor his pledge, and the secession proved a nightmare for the Igbos. What pledge are we talking about? And where exactly did you have this plan of the Southeast and the Southwest breaking away? Again, you would expect that people would question these things, interrogate these claims, not because you want to make the person look bad, but because you want to be sure that what you believe is the truth. Now, many people have cited a May 1967 meeting between Awolowo and Ojukwu, where Awolowo supposedly made the promise. But is it true? So I have something here from Chief MCK Ajuluchukwu. He was an Igbo politician, and he was present at the meeting that Awolowo had with Ojukwu. And by the way, this meeting was actually an event where representatives of the Western region, the Midwestern region, the Northern region, and the federal government went to Enugu to have a meeting with Ojukwu. Let me read something to you from MCK Ajuluchukwu. And by the way, this is from his foreword in the book Awo on the Nigerian Civil War. It says, the visit to Enugu on May 5, 1967 by Awo and his conversations with Colonel Odumegwu Ojukwu, military governor of eastern Nigeria, have been the subject of continuing public debate ever since. Incidentally, I had the opportunity of holding some informal discussions with the chief for 3 hours on the morning of May 6. In fact, we concluded our talks at 10:50 a.m., only 10 minutes before his first meeting with Ojukwu. I should therefore be in a position to testify from first-hand knowledge that at no time during that turbulent crisis did Awo harbor any thoughts or take any actions other than those calculated to encourage the continuing identification of the Igbos as an integral part of Nigeria, even if for a trial period of confederal linkage. At the same time, I felt certain then, after listening to him, that should the Igbos be pushed or forced out, he would be willing to lead the West out too, and with the East, Midwest, and Lagos help to organize a southern condominium. Now, let me quickly say something from what I just read now. Observe that he said, at the same time, I felt certain. Awolowo did not tell you that. You felt certain. That is on your own. I felt certain that after listening to him, that should the Igbos be pushed or forced out, he would be willing. He felt certain. Just like what Achebe said, none of them have said Awolowo said. The only person who actually made that statement of Awolowo pledged was Okonjo-Iweala. Achebe did not say it. Achebe said he is said to have declared. And then Adeluchukwu says here, I felt certain, not Awolowo promised. But let's continue. Perhaps, this is again from Chief MCK Adeluchukwu. Perhaps the most striking declaration made by Chief Awolowo during the first day of his talks with Ojukwu was the assurance regarding the safety of all Eastern Nigerians in the West and Lagos. The transcript of that recorded statement of May 6, 1967 is as follows. Nobody can tell when life will be lost, but I think, speaking the minds of the entire people of Western Nigeria and Midwestern Nigeria, that if anybody can at this stage take the life of an Igbo man or an Easterner, or if any outstanding Easterner loses his life by the act of someone else, the whole of the Western region and the Midwestern region will take it as the end of Nigeria. I can give that assurance on behalf of Western Nigeria and Lagos. Now, back to Chief MCK Adeluchukwu. It is now left to the people of the Eastern states, particularly the Igbos, bear witness to the fact that Chief Awolowo did indeed fulfill his promises in the crucial matter of life and death and pogrom. I'd like to repeat what Adeluchukwu says here. It is now left to the people of the Eastern states, particularly the Igbos, to bear witness to the fact that Chief Awolowo did indeed fulfill his promises in the crucial matter of life and death and pogrom. At no time in this meeting was a promise made that if the Eastern region seceded, the West would also follow suit. The promise Awo made was about the protection of the lives and property of Igbo people. What Awolowo promised, he kept. But that which he kept is not celebrated for. And people now try to denigrate him for a promise he did not make, expecting him to keep that promise instead of celebrating him for fulfilling the promise that he actually made. It's weird. And it's quite wild. So what you see here is that Awolowo actually indeed showed concern for the plight of the Easterners and of the Igbos, and he wanted to ensure that they were safe, at least in the Western region. Having fled from the North, he wanted to make sure that nobody, did to them in the West what was done to them in the North. And I'll read something to you from Awo's own speech. Papa said, some people wanted to make trouble with the Easterners in the West the other time, and I invited them and told them that they must not do so. The Easterners in the West are at most 15,000, but we had about 20,000 Westerners from the North, and still we cannot cope with their problem. How then is it justified that you want to send 15,000 Easterners home only to add to the 2 million they already have on hand? You can't do that. That's from the book Awo on the Nigerian Civil War. Awo said, don't send them back. Let them stay and don't hurt them. That's a promise. Okay, that's what Awo did. But nobody talks about that. Everybody just wants to talk about, oh, he promised us something and he didn't do it. Then I ask you, when and how did he make that promise? Then you say, I don't feel like give you. No source, no references, no transcript, no recordings, no documentation, nothing but propaganda. Let's go on. Let me go back to Chief Adeluchukwu and read something from his writings. He says, furthermore, there was no doubt about Chief Awolowo having given solemn undertaking that under certain expressed conditions, The West would also pull out of the Nigerian Federation were the Eastern region to secede. But contrary to widely held belief, especially in Igbo land, he did not make this pronouncement at his meeting with Odumegwu Ojukwu. The transcript of their conversations contained nothing of the kind. And so from what Ajidechukwu is saying here, you can deduce two things. Number one was that Papa expressed certain conditions. The question is, what were those conditions? We'll get to that in a bit. The second thing is that, contrary to what many people believe, those conditions were not even expressed at Papa's meeting with Ojukwu. It was at a meeting he held in Ibadan. You see, think about it, as far as Ibadan is from Enugu, that is how far the truth is from these lies that have been repeated for more than 50 years. There's no truth to it. No statement was made to that effect in Enugu. It was in Ibadan. But the question is that when he made that statement, what did he say? And what were those conditions that he expressed? We'll get to that. So the undertaking was given by Awo at a meeting of the Western Nigerian leaders of thought held at Ibadan in May 1967. At the meeting, Papa gave a speech titled Four Imperatives. It's actually a famous speech, Four Imperatives. And this is why it bothers me that people will not even care to search for this basic stuff that they can find anywhere before repeating and regurgitating what they've been told by propagandists. I'm going to read to you what Papa actually said in that meeting at Ibadan. I consider it my duty to Yoruba people in particular and to Nigerians in general to place four imperatives before you this morning. Two of them are categorical and two are conditional. 1. Only a peaceful solution must be found to arrest the present worsening stalemate and restore normalcy. 2. The Eastern region must be encouraged to remain part of the Federation. 3. If the Eastern region is allowed by acts of omission or commission to secede from or opt out of Nigeria, then the Western region and Lagos must also stay out of the Federation. 4. The people of Western Nigeria and Lagos should participate in the ad hoc committee or any similar body only on the basis of absolute equality with the other regions of the Federation. Now let's focus on the third imperative, because that's the one point that has mostly been misinterpreted. And I will say it has been intentionally misinterpreted. So let me read that again. It says, if the Eastern region is allowed, emphasis on allowed. If the Eastern region is allowed by any act of omission or commission to secede from the Federation, the Western region and Lagos must also stay out of the Federation. If the Eastern region is allowed, you cannot allow yourself. He did not say if the Eastern region secedes. He says if the Eastern region is allowed by any acts of omission or commission to secede from the Federation. This statement was not directed at the Eastern region. It's something that the federal government has to watch out for. If you allow these guys to go by any acts of omission or commission, then we would also leave. The question is, were you allowed? He didn't make the promise that if you left, we would leave. He said if you were allowed to go, we would also leave. So why do people intentionally misinterpret this thing to drive the narrative that certain people betray them when the people who betray them are actually people of their own household? Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that this word allowed in this context has nothing to do with the action of the Easterners or the action of Ojukwu. It has to do with whatever the federal government allowed. It's not on you. It's not on the Eastern region. It's on the federal government. Therefore, at no time did Awolowo make any promise. Contrary to what Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala and Chinua Achebe have written, At no time did Awolowo make the promise to the Igbos that if you seceded, we would also secede. It did not happen. It did not happen. And if no promise was made, then no promise was broken. Therefore, there's no reason to keep pushing this agenda that you were betrayed. And if by the way, if people decide to continue to push their agenda, at least people have to understand the fact that others should at least understand that it's an agenda. It's propaganda. There's no truth to it. And the only excuse I can make for certain people is to say that, you know what, maybe you have been a victim of propaganda as well, and you just repeated that same thing. However, I cannot change history just to make you feel comfortable. No promise was made, therefore none was broken, therefore there was no betrayal. Therefore, there should be no need for this propaganda, unless, of course, we're beginning to focus on driving a victim narrative, which, by the way, is unnecessary. Now, let me read to you what Chief MCK Ajodejuku had to say. In view of the above record, Chief Awolowo could have been rightly accused of having committed a breach of his undertaking, were he to have reneged on one or more of the following three propositions as contained in the very significant statement under reference. Number one, proposition to encourage the Eastern region to remain part of the Nigerian Federation. Number two, proposition that the Western region and Lagos would also stay out of the Federation if the Eastern region was quote-unquote allowed to secede. Number three, proposition relevant to the phrase acts of omission or commission as a factor governing the Western region's commitment to secede from the Federation should the Eastern region be pushed out. Every available evidence so far has exonerated Chief Awolowo on all counts. Unlike Pontius Pilate, the accusers of Awo on this secession issue ought to be bold enough to admit that they were wrong and consequently should relieve him of the heavy cross of false charges that he has so unjustly been made to bear in connection with this rather hypersensitive question. The accusers of Awo on this secession issue ought to be bold enough to admit that they were wrong and consequently should relieve him of the heavy cross of false charges that he has so unjustly been made to bear in connection with this rather hypersensitive question. So there you have it. Those who accuse Awolowo of betraying Igbos, they need to be true to themselves. They need to look in the mirror and admit to themselves that they were wrong, that their secessionist bid did not work out, and that the failure of that thing working out has nothing to do with the participation of Papa Awolowo. And so, to be clear, neither Awolowo nor the Yorubas betrayed the Igbos. As a matter of fact, those who betrayed the Igbos are actually closer to them than they know or they are willing to admit. They are right there. And you see, in subsequent episodes, I'm going to be talking about how the betrayal really happened. But maybe we should start with this claim of, what Achebe wrote in his book. Let's not sweep Awolowo's role in the Civil War under the carpet. No, let's not sweep it under the carpet. In the next episode, we're going to discuss Awolowo's role in the Nigerian Civil War. And yes, I'm going to bring up references and sources so that you can actually understand what happened, what Awolowo has been accused of, and if there's any truth to it. Now, I'm going to tell you this. I adore Awo. However, if he did anything wrong, I will tell you he did. Because, yes, while I believe that he was a great man and he's still here with us, his ideology is here with us, his accomplishments are here with us, and his spirit is still here with us. But you see, he was also human. So if he made any mistakes, I will be the one to tell you, listen, he was wrong here, he was right here. But what we're not going to do is to lie and spread wrong narratives and make him out to be this terrible person just because he didn't favor our cause. Your cause is not divinely sanctioned. A person can choose not to favor that cause. It doesn't make them evil. And it's important that we have these conversations so that people actually know what the truth is, and then they can decide and believe whatever they want to believe based on true information. You don't have to even agree with me. However, if you're wrong, you are wrong, whether I agree, whether you've been saying it for 58 years or not. So in the next episode, I'll try to talk about Awolowo's role during the war, especially the economy, the food blockade, the 20-pound policy, the change of currency, all those things. We'll get into them. And then we'll see if the things that are being said about Awo, if those things are true or not. I'll give you a clue. Most of what's being said are products of Radio Biafra. And I'm going to tell you more about why the propaganda still thrives today and why it's important for us to actually get right to the truth and not just believe something because people repeat it over and over again. Now, I understand that it's an emotional conversation. I understand that people have pains from that particular episode in Nigeria's history. However, while I acknowledge the pain, what I recommend is healing. What I recommend is healing, not blackmail, not gaslighting. Let's find healing rather than blaming me for whatever it is that you're responsible for. If we do that, we can build a great nation. If you're not going to do that, then we're going to have to explain exactly what happened. Maybe others would understand exactly what happened, and then we can begin to think of how to find healing. Because as far as I'm concerned, healing is more important than the dedication to play the victim based on things that never happened. Thank you very much for being part of today's conversation. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Let's keep the conversation going. Adebusui Lorukomi, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.